First, let's try to understand the magnitude and historical context of our moment, right? On the magnitude, let's remember that yes, there is rise of populism, and I have the data in my pocket if you want to get the precise numbers in Europe and most certainly in the United States. But there's a lot of variation on that. It's not uniform over time. Some places aren't experiencing it at all. Canada seems to do pretty well. France had a scare. Maybe we'll hear about Germany in a minute. And so populism should be populisms, there's not one global populist movement. There's lots of different populist movements and lots of variation on terms of what we're trying to explain. Second historical thing, it's always compared to what? The end of liberal order?
Right.
Is this really scary?
That's that book. That's he's next.
Well,
yeah.
Okay, compared to the 1930s, not so much. Compared to the 1970s, not so much. Let's remember that there was a time, I see enough gray hair in this room that you will remember, there was this thing called communism. It was rising, and in the 70s, Indochina fell, Southern Africa fell. There was a real threat to the liberal order then. That was not too long ago. So that's the framing issue first. The second big thing I would say, and maybe we're going to get to this in a minute, is we really need to have a much better understanding of the causes of populism, and again, not to treat it as a one universal thing. I think it's a pretty sloppy debate so far. And Ed, I have not read your book, except for that book. But is this because of the China shock? Is this because of automation? Is this because of immigration? Is it because of ideologues that have risen up, including in our own country? And what is the role of institutions in mediating populist movements versus outcomes? I think all of those things are at play. In some countries, they're in play more than others, and we just have to remember that there's not a unified story here. And I get really scared, just speaking of America, when there is this narrative about, and I've heard it at this conference, by the way, 2 or 3 times now, that the rise of the demise of the white working class in the middle of the country. I'm from Montana. I come from that I have lots of white working class relatives. They almost all voted for Trump. And that is real. But let's remember just how different our conversation would be had 77,000 of them voted a different way.
Right.
Let's remember how different our conversation would be if we had a different set of institutions, like, by the way, most of Europe does. And let's remember, before we predict that this is a long-term trajectory, I don't know. I want to be clear. I don't know what the moment is, and maybe in the next round I'll talk about the future. Right. But I do know that in 2008, my former boss got 48% of the vote in my home state in Montana.
Right.
That was just 8 years ago. That wasn't 50 years ago. And so I just would remind you that before we think we're off the ledge and this is the end of liberal democracy, remember how small the data sets here are, that had they gone, and same with Brexit, by the way, had it gone a different way, we might be having a different conversation.
So thank you for that.